Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, Made You Book. My name's Gretchen, and today I'm going to talk about the 13 books that I think have a really good chance of making this year's long list for the International Booker Prize. Now, the International Booker Prize is probably my favorite book prize of the year. I know it's up there with the Booker Prize. They're kind of like neck and neck, but what I will say is I love translated fiction, and because the International Booker solely focuses on works in translation, this is right up my alley, and I absolutely adore this prize for that reason. I also love this prize because it is about contemporary translations. So we have books that have recently been written by the author in their native language, but they've also quickly been translated into English. And there's a lot of those that are on my predictions list. But the other thing that I love about this prize is that the translation into English is what has to have been published between the eligibility dates for this year. So that means you could have a book that was written years and years and years ago that's getting their first English translation, and that book could potentially be eligible, assuming that the author that wrote it is still alive, because that is another stipulation to the prize, is that whatever work gets nominated, the author also has to be alive. So unfortunately, that does disqualify some books that I had originally had on my list, because that author is no longer with us, and therefore she was not eligible. So this list took a little bit more research for me to put together, although it didn't take me long to figure out what books I wanted or thought had a good chance. It really took a lot of time to dig in deep to make sure that these books actually met all of the criteria. It's a little harder with the International Booker because there are some different variations that we're not used to seeing in different book prizes. I'll also mention, in case I haven't, this long list is going to be announced on the 11th of March. So I am filming this on March 2nd, so we still have a little bit of time, and in between now and then, I will also note we will have also had the long list for the Women's Prize for Fiction announced. That's being released on the 5th, and then also if you're following the Republic of Consciousness Prize in the US and Canada, that short list is going to be announced on the same day the Women's Prize long list is announced. So book prize season is well underway, and I'm so excited because this is just my favorite time of the literary year when all of these prizes and these new long lists start to come out. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start to get into the books that I think are going to make it. The first book that I am predicting is actually the only book that I don't have a physical copy of, so I figured I would get that out of the way so that I don't forget to include it, and that is Honeybees and Distant Thunder by Riku Onda, and it is translated from the Japanese by Philip Gabriel. The reason that this book caught my attention is I have heard a lot of good reviews about this book. This one was actually published very shortly after last year's cutoff date, so it's been around for a while, and the people that I know that have read it have said amazing things about it. And the second reason is that it follows the lives of 3 different people, and they're people that don't know that their lives are connected yet, and then they kind of mesh together and eventually become intertwined, and we find out what their connections are. And I absolutely absolutely love books that are ambitious enough to take something like that on. Now, this book, I don't know too much about it aside from it follows 3 participants in a piano competition in Tokyo, and it follows them over the course, I think, of 2 weeks. So we also have a very short time frame with the characters. I like when we have those condensed narratives and it's not taking place over a long period of time. And like I said, my main reason is because I've heard really great things about it, and I hope that it makes the list because it has been on my TBR probably, it's the longest one that's been on my TBR, and I really do need to get to it. The next book that I'm predicting is Beyond the Door of No Return by David Diop, and this is translated from the French by Sam Taylor. There are several French translations that have made my list. I don't know why, but I've really found myself gravitating toward French translations this year, and this one is catching my attention for a couple reasons. First of all, David Diop has previously won the International Booker for At Night All Blood is Black, and I think that he won that in, doesn't say, but I think it was 2021. And also, this book has a super interesting premise. So this book follows a botanist, and he is a respected botanist, and he's lived a long life, and on his deathbed, his last word that he utters is a name of a woman, and nobody really knows who he's talking about or what he's referring to. But then as they start to look into his effects after his passing, they find a manuscript of his unfinished memoir that takes him back to the time where he was in Senegal and fell in love with this woman, and she was taken as part of the Atlantic slave trade, and we learn more about her and his connection to her and all of that. So this book sounds so interesting to me. It sounds like it's going to have a lot to say about things like colonialism and slavery, but it also sounds like it has a solid love story behind it too. I think that because it sounds like such an interesting book and it comes from a well-loved author in the realm of the International Booker already, that this one stands a pretty good chance. One of my other French translation picks is going to be Vengeance is Mine by Marie NDiaye, and this is translated from the French by Jordan Stump. And this book caught my attention because it is said to be half suspense novel, half dark fairy tale, and that sounds pretty intriguing to me, especially when I read the blurb and it talks about the story focusing on a middle-aged lawyer that mysteriously gets a call from somebody that she had a loose connection with over the years, and this man that contacts her, his wife is accused of this horrific crime, and he kind of channels her out to be the lawyer for this case, and she really doesn't know why, and I'm sure there's a lot of juicy stuff to dig into in this book, and it sounds like it could be a real page turner. The next book is the only book that I have read, and that is Lojman, and this is by Ebru Ojen, and it is translated from the Turkish by Aron and Selin Gokcesu. Now, oh my goodness, this book, there was no way that I was not going to predict this book. This is for any of you that are fans of Fernanda Melchor, or you enjoyed, well, I hate to say enjoy, but if you liked Hurricane Season, this takes Hurricane Season to another level. I absolutely adored Hurricane Season, but it was dark, it was sick, it was depraved. This book, it is the unhinged version of hurricane season for me. So if that sounds like it's something that you would like to read, this is going to be your book. Now, this book follows our two main characters. We have Selma, who is the mother, and we have Gorkum, who is the daughter. Now, they are living in a very harsh environment in a Lojman, which is kind of like a teacher's quarters within a village, and they are basically hit with this horrific blizzard. And prior to the storm hitting, Selma and her husband get into a fight, and he storms off. And it's not unusual for him to do that, but it's been a while since he has come, and they're starting to worry. In the meantime, at his departure, Selma was pregnant. She gives birth to a child, and basically we learn about all of the unhinged and horrible thoughts that Selma is having. She doesn't want to be a mother. She resents her children. And then we have Gorkum, who is the daughter. She equally despises her mother, and there is just so much hatred and ugliness and depravity in this book, and I loved every single minute of it. It is, like I said, very dark, but it has a lot to say, and what it has to say is done in a blunt, sharp, it slaps you across the face kind of narrative, and I loved it, and I would absolutely love to see this book get some more recognition. This was one of the books that was brought to my attention because it was longlisted for the Republic of Consciousness Prize for the US and Canada, and I read it, and I could totally see this being something that the International Booker judges would pounce on, especially considering they're not afraid of, highlighting those books that are shocking and maybe not so mainstream, or ones that would be enjoyed by all audiences. So highly recommend if you haven't. I do plan on doing a full-length review of this book at a later time, but I do hope to see it make the long list because I really want more people to read it so I can talk to them about it. My next prediction is My Men by Victoria Keilland, and this is translated from the Norwegian by Damion Searls. And Damion Searls is no stranger to the Booker Prize. He has been nominated for works that he has translated for Jan Fossa, and I am hoping that this book lives up to the hype that I have built up in my mind. So basically, this follows the story of the first female serial killer in America. And this woman, she came over to the States from Norway, and this tells the true story. It's a novel, but it is based on a true story of that woman. So I am really, really interested in anything related to true crime, and this sounds really fascinating. And also, I had no idea that the first serial killer that was a woman in the States actually wasn't American. So I'm really curious to read more about this. My next prediction is The Bridesman by Savyon Leibrecht, and this is translated from the Hebrew by Gilah Kahn-Hoffman. This book follows our main character, Micah. He is an expat that's living in California, and he left Israel years prior, and shortly before he left, he was the bridesman in his uncle's wedding to a woman named Adela. So years later, Adela gets in contact with Micah, and she is practically begging him, from what I understand, to make a journey back to Israel for some reason. And whenever he gets there, we start to uncover all of this drama and the reasons why it was so important for him to come back to Israel. So I think that that's just enough of a teaser for me to be really interested in it. I love anything to do with a family drama, especially a drama that takes place over over long periods of time and is stirring things up from the past. And also, that's a beautiful cover. And I know we shouldn't base our love of books on covers, but every once in a while you see those books where you know you just have to read it because it has such a pretty cover. And this is one of them for me. So the next book that I think stands a pretty good chance is going to be The End of August by Yu Miri, and this is translated from the Japanese by Morgan Giles. Now, there's a couple reasons why I think this book stands a pretty good chance. First of all, it's published by Tilted Axis Press. Tilted Axis Press was the publishing house that took the prize a few years ago with Tomb of Sand, so they have a pretty good reputation, and most years we tend to see, if not one, sometimes two Tilted Axis Press books nominated, or longlisted, I should say. The other thing that's interesting about this book to me is we are in a year where we're going to have some Summer Olympics in Paris. So this is interesting because the book follows a man that is a Korean living in a Japanese occupied part of Korea in the 1930s, and he is a runner. He's an athlete that is going to be able to participate in the Olympics, but the caveat is, in order for him to do so, he would have to run under the Japanese flag. So we have that story. And then we look ahead to present day, where we have that man's granddaughter, and she is training for a marathon. And during her training and whatever else is going on in her life, she's trying to conjure up the spirit of her grandfather and learn more about what it was like for him, them sharing the love of running. And then also, this book has semi-autobiographical tones to it as well, because another interesting thing about this author is that she is a Korean author, but she writes her books in Japanese. So I think that there's going to be a lot of interesting things about family and politics with, you know, the occupation of Korea from the Japanese. And I really think that it's going to have a lot to say. Obviously, it is a very big book. This book is just over 700 pages. So I think that it's going to focus on a lot of probably complex subjects that take a long time to talk about. It says it does focus on generational trauma, shedding light on the post-war migration of Koreans to Japan. So we're in for our long haul with this one. It's going to be quite a ride. And also, this is another one that has such a pretty cover. Oh, so pretty. The next book that I want to talk about is Foul Eulogies by Lucy Rico, and this is translated from the French by Daria Chernysheva. And this book sounds so inventive. It sounds like nothing I have ever read before. And basically, this book follows our main character, who is a vegetarian, and her mother passes away, and it is her mother's dying wish that she takes over the family business and keeps that tradition going. Well, the family business just so happens to be, it's a chicken farm. And she begrudgingly, I believe at first, agrees to do this. And part of the way that she kind of assuages her guilt for doing something she likely finds morally repugnant is she helps the chickens self-actualize their death and come to terms with it. And she includes a eulogy on each package of chicken that she sells after they have been slaughtered. So this book sounds so unique. It sounds like something that is going to tackle a lot of maybe tough subjects in a lighthearted and comedic way. I'm sure it's going to touch on grief. I'm sure it's going to touch on things like animal cruelty, obviously, potentially climate change due to the character being vegetarian. So I think that there's going to be a lot to unpack. This book was immediately calling out to me because not only the cover, but it did also win, not sure if you can see that, it won an ecology novel award as well. So I'm sure that there's a lot to say about the environment and the state of the world in general. So I'm really looking forward to this, and this is likely one that if it doesn't get longlisted, I'm going to prioritize this because I've been sitting on this for longer than I want to, and I've just been itching to get to it. So the next book that I think has a pretty good chance is You Dreamed of Empires by Alvaro Enrique, and this is translated from the Spanish by Natasha Weimer. And this to me sounds like it would be interesting because it has historical elements, and it also seems like it could be a politically motivated book as well, because it is a potential reimagining of the settlement of Tenochtitlan, which is current day Mexico City. So the author is reimagining what would happen if what happened with that settlement all of those years ago had a different outcome. And anytime we have authors that are brave enough to rewrite history, I am always fascinated with that, and I think that this definitely has a chance. And obviously the cover, oh my god, it's gorgeous. Like, they are killing it with the covers this year, seriously. My next prediction is Chyrs by Jenny Erpenbeck, and this is translated from the German by Michael Hoffman. This book is a love story that is set against the backdrop of the fall of the Berlin Wall in the late 80s. Now, I know there are other books out there that are focused around the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall, but I honestly can't think of any that I have personally read. So selfishly, that's kind of why I want to see this make the long list, because I'm really interested in that history. I was very young at the time. I was 9 or 10 when it happened, and I have vague memories of following that story as a child, and I think that I would be interested to revisit that and learn more about it as an adult when I actually could understand or appreciate what was going on at the time more. So I've heard really good things about this book. It's not just me that wants it selfishly to be on there. I have heard a lot of critical acclaim for it, and I didn't think that we could make an International Booker Prize predictions video without including at least one German translation. We're down to our last two books, and this one is The Annual Banquet of the Gravediggers Guild by Matthias Enyard, and this is translated from the French by Frank Wynne. Of all the books that I've mentioned so far, this is probably the one that I find most intriguing. I actually heard about this book early last year, when Fitzcarraldo was starting to mention the books that they were going to be releasing. Now, I know this is not a Fitzcarraldo edition. In the UK, where the prize is based, it's published under Fitzcarraldo, but not here in the States. This story follows our main character, David. He is an anthropology student, and he is working on his thesis. In order to get research, he decides that he is going to travel to this remote little village in France, and he is going to speak to some of the locals there to try to get material for his work. Now, once he starts to talk to some of the locals, he realizes that all is not as it seems, and this place might be a little more special than he had originally planned. And what he doesn't realize is, and I'm actually going to read this from the blurb because I don't want to get this wrong, because it sounds so amazing. So what David doesn't know is that here, death leads a dance. When one thing perishes, the wheel of life recycles its soul and hurls it back into the world as a microbe, human or wild animal, sometimes in the past, sometimes in the future. And once a year, death and the living observe a temporary truce during a magnificent 3-day feast where gravediggers gorge themselves on food, drink, and tales. I mean, that just sounds so good. Now, obviously, this has a lot to do with magical realism or speculative fiction, and I know that's not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but I love these kinds of books. It sounds something, like I said, that could be so magical if done right, and it could be a total faceplant if it's done wrong. But I have faith, like I said, this being published by Fitzcarraldo in the UK, they tend to always publish bangers. They don't waste their time on books that aren't going to meet the hype. So I'm really excited about this one, and I would love to see this make the list. And last but not least, we have Crooked Plow by Itamar Vieira Jr., and this is translated from the Portuguese by Johnny Lorenz. Now, this book, I'm just going to go ahead and read the blurb as well. This author has been getting a lot of buzz as of late, and when I read what this book was about, I could totally see why. So it says, deep in the neglected hinterland of Bahia, Brazil, two sisters find a mysterious knife beneath their grandmother's bed. Momentarily mystified by its power, they decide to taste its metal. The shuddering violence that follows marks their lives and binds them together forever. Heralded as a masterpiece, this fascinating and gripping story about the lives of subsistence farmers in Brazil's poorest region, 3 generations after the abolition of slavery, is at once fantastic and realist, encompassing themes of family, spirituality, and political struggle. That just sounds fantastic, and I cannot wait to read this one, regardless of it making the long list. Well, there you have it. Those are my predictions. At the time that this video comes out, we'll probably just have maybe a week to go, and I am so looking forward to seeing what that list is. There are always just the best books that I didn't even have on my radar that end up on the list. And just like any predictions video, the point of making these is not to get all 13 books correct. It's to force me to research the books that I think are going to be interesting and share them with you. But it's also just so much fun to, interact with the community and see what types of books everybody else thinks is going to be on the list as well. And regardless of what makes it, we're going to have 13 amazing books to read for the long list. This is a prize I will be reading the entirety of the long list for. So I will definitely be doing individual book reviews for any and all of the books that are long listed, and I can't wait to get started. So until we read again, bye.